Have you ever checked your pocket change for treasure? Most people don't realize that some of the most valuable coins in American numismatics might be hiding in plain sight. I'm talking about coins that look ordinary at first glance but could be worth thousands of dollars. Today, we're diving deep into the fascinating world of Jefferson Nickels, specifically the 1959, 1961, and 1963 issues that have been making waves in collector circles. These aren't your typical rare coins from the 1800s that everyone knows about. These are modern treasures that could be sitting in your change jar right now. Let's start with the 1959 Jefferson nickel, a coin that perfectly embodies how seemingly common currency can hold extraordinary value. What makes this particular year fascinating is the combination of historical context, minting anomalies, and the surprising scarcity of pristine examples despite its relatively recent mintage. The year 1959 marked a significant period in American history. It was the year Alaska and Hawaii achieved statehood, completing our 50-state union. The Cold War was intensifying, and the space race was heating up following the Soviet Union's launch of Sputnik just 2 years prior. Monticello, Jefferson's beloved home that graces the reverse of these nickels, was in the midst of a major restoration project funded by Stanley Drucker, whose preservation efforts would ensure this architectural masterpiece remained intact for future generations. Against this historical backdrop, the Philadelphia and Denver mints were busy producing what would become nearly 153 million nickels combined that year. Philadelphia struck approximately 27.2 million while Denver produced an impressive 125.7 million. On paper, these numbers suggest a common coin, and indeed, in circulated condition, most 1959 nickels are worth only their face value. But here's where our story gets interesting. Despite those substantial mintage figures, the 1959 nickel is remarkably difficult to find in gem-uncirculated condition. Why? The answer lies in the quality control practices of the era. The late 1950s were marked by somewhat less stringent standards at the U.S. Mint. Coins were primarily produced for commerce, not collectors, and the mint wasn't particularly concerned with perfection. Dies were used longer, resulting in more strike-related issues, and the handling of freshly minted coins often left bag marks and other imperfections. When examining a 1959 Jefferson nickel, the first thing experienced collectors look for is the full steps detail on Monticello. The steps leading up to Jefferson's home on the reverse side are notoriously difficult to find fully struck on these issues. A true, full steps example, showing all 5 or 6 steps clearly defined with complete horizontal lines, is the holy grail for Jefferson nickel enthusiasts. The mint's striking pressure and die alignment had to be absolutely perfect to capture this detail, and that rarely happened in 1959. The obverse portrait of Jefferson also reveals telling details. Look closely at Jefferson's hair and the word "Liberty." These areas frequently show weakness in the strike. Strong hair detail with clear separation between the strands indicates a superior strike. The mint mark, found on the reverse side next to Monticello, is another crucial identifier. The D mint mark for Denver examples should be examined for clarity and positioning. What truly sets apart premium examples of the 1959 nickel is surface quality. The finest specimens show satiny luster with minimal spotting, a challenging characteristic to find because nickel as a metal is particularly prone to spotting and toning over time. Original mint luster should appear unbroken across the fields, creating what collectors call cartwheel effect, and the coin is rotated under light. Now, let's talk about the current market values, which might surprise you. While a typical circulated 1959 Jefferson nickel might be worth only 5 cents, the value increases exponentially with condition. A nicely preserved uncirculated example might bring $1 to $3, but the real value lies in the premium examples. A 1959 nickel graded MS 65, mint state 65 on the 70-point scale, might fetch $20 to $30, but jump to MS 66, and values climb to $75 to $100. At MS 67, we're looking at $500 to $700. The truly extraordinary specimens, those graded MS 67 plus or MS 68, have sold for $2,000 to $5,000 in recent auctions. The most valuable 1959 nickels, however, are those with the full steps designation. A 1959 Denver nickel with full steps in MS 66 condition sold for an astonishing $9,400 at a heritage auction in 2018. Even more impressive, a 1959 Philadelphia issue with full steps in MS 67 condition commanded $14,100 at a Stack's Bowers auction in 2019. These prices reflect the extreme rarity of finding these coins in such pristine condition with full striking detail. There's a fascinating story about a collector from Minnesota who, in 2015, discovered a near-perfect 1959 D nickel in an original mint set he purchased for just $30 at a local coin shop. The seller had no idea that one of the nickels in the set would grade MS 67 with full steps. That single coin later sold for over $3,800, more than 76,000 times its face value. Stories like this are what keep collectors examining their coins with magnifying glasses and dreams of striking it rich. The condition-based value variations for the 1959 nickel are particularly dramatic. A circulated example might be worth just 5 cents, while an average uncirculated coin might bring $1 or $2. But each step up the condition ladder multiplies the value significantly. This creates an interesting dynamic where a coin that appears only marginally better to the untrained eye might be worth 10 times as much to an experienced collector. What makes the 1959 nickel particularly challenging for collectors is the issue of strike quality. Many uncirculated examples have been preserved over the decades, but very few received the perfect strike necessary to show all the architectural details of Monticello clearly. The pressure required to force metal into every crevice of the die was often inconsistent, leaving even mint-state coins with mushy or incomplete details on the steps. Collectors should also be aware of the full steps designation criteria. Professional grading services like PCGS and NGC require 5 or 6 clear, complete horizontal steps on Monticello with no interruptions to award this premium designation. Coins with even slight weakness in this area don't qualify, which is why full steps examples command such significant premiums. Another interesting aspect of collecting the 1959 nickel involves die varieties. Several notable double die varieties exist for this year, where elements of the design show doubling due to misalignment during the die hubbing process. The most notable is the 1959 D double die reverse, where doubling is visible on Monticello and 5 cents. These varieties can add considerable premium to an already valuable coin. The 1959 nickel also has a place in the broader context of Jefferson nickel collecting. The series, which began in 1938 and continues today, albeit with updated designs after 2004, represents an accessible entry point for many collectors. The 1959 issue, while not as famous as the wartime silver, composition nickels, or the ultra-rare 1950 D, has gradually gained recognition as condition rarity that deserves serious attention. For those wondering about authentication concerns, the good news is that counterfeiting is rarely an issue with Jefferson nickels. The relatively modest value, compared to gold coins or key-date rarities, makes them unattractive targets for counterfeiters. However, altered mint marks were somewhat common during the coin collecting boom of the 1960s, so examining the mint mark carefully is always advised. If you're examining your own collection for these treasures, remember that lighting is crucial. Use a balanced, natural light source when examining nickels, as harsh or yellow lighting can mask important details or surface characteristics. A good quality magnifying glass or coin loupe is essential for spotting the fine details that separate an ordinary example from a potential 4-figure rarity. Now let's move on to our second featured coin, the 1961 Jefferson nickel. While it might seem like we're covering similar territory, the 1961 nickel presents an entirely different collecting challenge with its own unique story and market characteristics that separate it from its 1959 cousin. The early 1960s marked a fascinating transition period in American history and coinage. John F. Kennedy had just been inaugurated as the 35th president, bringing youthful energy to the White House. The Cold War tensions continued to escalate with the construction of the Berlin Wall, and the United States was racing to fulfill Kennedy's bold promise to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. Amid this historical backdrop, the U.S. Mint was quietly producing millions of Jefferson Nickels that would eventually become some of the most sought-after modern coins for condition-conscious collectors. In 1961, the Philadelphia facility struck approximately 220.6 million nickels without a mint mark, while the Denver Mint produced about 349.8 million bearing the D mint mark. These substantial mintage figures, over 570 million combined, would suggest these coins should be common in all conditions. Yet paradoxically, the 1961 nickel, particularly from the Denver Mint, has become one of the most elusive Jefferson Nickels to find in pristine condition. The primary reason lies in the peculiar production characteristics of that year. The Denver Mint in 1961 was using worn dies that frequently created weakly struck coins. The situation was compounded by reports that the mint was using an inadequate amount of striking pressure during production. These technical issues resulted in coins that often lacked sharp detail, particularly on the reverse design featuring Monticello. What makes the 1961 D nickel particularly fascinating is its notorious difficulty in finding examples with full steps detail on Monticello. For those unfamiliar with this designation, professional grading services award the full steps designation only when the steps leading up to Monticello show complete, uninterrupted horizontal lines, usually 5 or 6 steps depending on the grading service's criteria. This detail is exceptionally hard to find on 1961 D nickels and is the primary driver of premium values. Examining a 1961 Jefferson nickel requires special attention to several key areas. First, look at Jefferson's portrait on the obverse. His hair detail should show clear separation between the strands, and the word "Liberty" should be sharply defined. On most 1961 nickels, these details appear somewhat flat or mushy, even on uncirculated examples. The date and mint mark should be examined for clarity and proper positioning. The reverse side demands the most scrutiny, particularly Monticello's columns and steps. The columns should be well defined with visible fluting, and the steps leading up to the building are the critical area for determining premium value. Most 1961 nickels, even those with minimal circulation, show weakness in the step detail. This creates a fascinating situation where the coin's condition isn't just about wear, it's about how well it was struck to begin with. The luster on a properly preserved 1961 nickel should exhibit a satiny, almost frosty appearance. Unlike some other years that show more cartwheel luster, the 1961 issues typically display a more subdued, even sheen across the surfaces. Any disruption to this luster pattern, whether from handling, improper storage, or environmental damage, significantly impacts value. Speaking of value, the market for 1961 Jefferson nickels shows one of the most dramatic condition-based price spreads of any modern U.S. coin. A typical circulated example might be worth only its face value of 5 cents. An uncirculated example in MS-63 or MS-64 might bring just $1 to $5. But the value curve steepens dramatically at the gem level. An MS-65 specimen might sell for $15 to $25, while an MS-66 can command $50 to $75. The truly remarkable values emerge at the MS-67 level, where 1961 Denver nickels have sold for $700 to $900 in recent auctions. At the nearly unattainable MS-67 Plus and MS-68 grades, prices have eclipsed $2,500 to $4,000. But these figures pale in comparison to those achieved by full steps examples. A 1961 D nickel with full steps in MS-66 condition sold for an astonishing $15,275 at a heritage auction in 2020. Even more impressive, a perfect MS-67 full steps example sold for $29,900, making it one of the most valuable Jefferson nickels of any date. There's a particularly interesting auction story concerning a 1961 D nickel that demonstrates how overlooked these coins were until relatively recently. In 2004, a collector submitted a 1961 D nickel that had been sitting in an old mint set to PCGS for grading. It came back as MS-67 with full steps, one of only a handful known at that time. The coin, which cost just 5 cents when issued and had been purchased as part of a $3 mint set decades earlier, sold for $18,400 at auction. The seller later admitted he had nearly spent the coin years before, having no idea of its potential value. Another fascinating aspect of the 1961 nickel involves its composition. This was one of the last years before silver prices would begin to rise dramatically, eventually forcing the mint to remove silver from dimes and quarters in 1965. The 1961 nickel, while made of the standard 75% copper and 25% nickel alloy, represents the tail end of an era when U.S. coins contained their stated metallic value. Just a few years later, rising metal prices would forever change American coinage. Collectors should be aware of several die varieties that exist for 1961 nickels. The most notable is the 1961 double die obverse, where doubling is visible on Jefferson's I and other obverse elements. While not as dramatic as some other double dies in the series, this variety adds a premium of several $100s in high grades and gives collectors another challenging piece to hunt for in their searches. The collecting community has recently begun paying much more attention to strike quality on Jefferson Nickels, and the 1961 D has benefited tremendously from this shift in focus. 20 years ago, few collectors differentiated between weakly struck and fully struck examples. Today, the premium for sharp strikes can multiply a coin's value by 50 times or more. This evolution in collecting preferences has created a fascinating market dynamic where a coin's value is determined more by its technical merits than its absolute rarity. For those hunting for high-grade 1961 nickels, original mint sets from that year are often the best source. Coins preserved in these sets were typically handled less than those released into circulation and had at least some protection from environmental damage. However, even mint-set coins frequently show striking deficiencies, making the search for perfect examples all the more challenging. Authentication concerns for 1961 nickels primarily involve altered mint marks. Since the Philadelphia issue doesn't carry a mint mark, unscrupulous collectors in the past sometimes added a D to Philadelphia coins in an attempt to create the more valuable Denver variety. This alteration can usually be detected by examining the mint mark under magnification, as added mint marks typically show tooling marks or improper positioning. Preservation techniques are crucial for maintaining the value of uncirculated 1961 nickels. These coins should never be cleaned, as even gentle cleaning can disturb the original mint luster that collectors prize. They should be stored in inert, non-PVC holders in stable environmental conditions. Nickel as a metal is particularly susceptible to spotting if exposed to humidity or environmental contaminants, so proper storage is essential to maintaining value. For those interested in building a collection around this theme, the 1961 D nickel pairs naturally with other condition rarity Jefferson nickels, particularly those from the 1960s. The 1961, 1963, and 1964 D nickels form a challenging trio of coins that appear common but are genuinely scarce in top condition. Building a collection of these condition rarities provides both a numismatic challenge and a potentially rewarding investment. Our final featured coin today is the 1963 Jefferson nickel, a coin that completes our trilogy of seemingly ordinary nickels with extraordinary potential value. The 1963 issue presents yet another unique case study in how modern coins that most people overlook can hold tremendous premiums under the right circumstances. The year 1963 was a pivotal one in American history, marked by profound cultural shifts and tragic events. It witnessed Martin Luther King Jr.'s "I Have a Dream" speech, which would forever change the civil rights movement. The year ended in national mourning with the assassination of President Kennedy in November. Amid these historic developments, the U.S. Mint was busy producing what would become one of the most challenging Jefferson nickels for modern collectors to find in pristine condition. The Philadelphia Mint struck approximately 276.8 million nickels in 1963, while the Denver facility produced about 276.3 million pieces with the D Mint mark. These nearly identical production figures, over 553 million combined, created one of the highest mintage years for Jefferson Nickels. Yet despite this enormous production, finding gem-quality examples with full striking detail has proven extraordinarily difficult. What makes the 1963 nickel particularly fascinating is that both mint facilities seemed to struggle with production quality that year. Unlike some years where one mint produced sharper coins than the other, both Philadelphia and Denver issued mostly weakly struck 1963 nickels. This production anomaly has created a situation where truly well-struck examples from either mint command significant premiums. When examining a 1963 Jefferson nickel, pay special attention to several key areas that reveal its quality and potential value. On the obverse, Jefferson's hair detail and the word Liberty often show striking weakness. A premium example will show clear separation in the hair strands and sharp definition in each letter of Liberty. The date should be examined for clarity and proper positioning within the field. The reverse side reveals the most crucial details for determining premium value. Monticello's dome and columns should show clear architectural details, and the steps leading up to the building are the critical area that determines whether a coin qualifies for the valuable full steps designation. Professional grading services require 5 or 6 complete, uninterrupted horizontal steps to award this designation, and very few 1963 nickels, perhaps fewer than 1 in 10,000, qualify. The luster on a properly preserved 1963 nickel typically displays a satiny texture that's somewhat less frosty than earlier dates in the series. This luster should appear unbroken across the coin's surface, creating subtle light patterns when rotated under good lighting. Any disruption to this luster pattern significantly impacts value. The market values for 1963 Jefferson nickels demonstrate the dramatic premium placed on condition and strike quality. A typical circulated example might be worth only face value, while average uncirculated coins bring just $1 to $3. The value curve begins to steepen at the MS-65 level, where coins might sell for $15 to $30. At MS-66, prices jump to $75 to $125, and truly superb MS-67 examples have brought $800 to $1,200 in recent auctions. The real premium market, however, is for those elusive full steps examples. A 1963 Philadelphia nickel with full steps in MS-65 condition might bring $400 to $600, while an MS-66 with this designation has sold for $1,500 to $2,000. The few MS-67 full steps examples that have appeared at auction have commanded prices between $5,000 to $7,500. Even more impressive, a 1963 D in MS-67 with full steps sold for an astonishing $18,800 at a heritage auction in 2019, making it almost 376,000 times its face value. There's a remarkable story about a roll of 1,963 nickels discovered in a bank vault in Ohio in 2012. The roll had been set aside in the 1960s and forgotten until the bank was renovating its safe deposit area. When examined by a knowledgeable coin dealer, the roll contained several pristine examples, including 2 that later graded MS-67 with full steps. Those 2 coins alone sold for a combined $12,650, not bad for a forgotten roll of nickels with a face value of just $2. Another interesting aspect of the 1963 nickel involves its historical context within American numismatics. This was one of the last years before the coin shortage of 1964 would drastically change U.S. coinage policies. The following year would see the last silver dimes and quarters produced for circulation, and the mint would temporarily remove mint marks from 1965 to 1967 to discourage collecting. The 1963 nickel represents the end of an era in American coinage before these significant changes. For variety hunters, the 1963 nickel offers several interesting double-die varieties. The most notable is the 1963 D double-die reverse, which shows doubling on Monticello and 5 cents. While not as dramatic or valuable as some other double dies in U.S. coinage, these varieties add another dimension to collecting this date and can bring premiums of several $100s in high grades. What makes collecting high-grade 1963 nickels particularly challenging is that even original mint set coins from that year frequently show striking deficiencies. The mint was focused on production quantity over quality, using dies longer than ideal and often with insufficient striking pressure. This historical reality has created a situation where even coins that were never released into circulation rarely show the sharp detail that collectors prize today. The inspection and grading standards for 1963 nickels are particularly stringent. Professional grading services examine the steps on Monticello under high magnification, and even the slightest interruption in any step line disqualifies a coin from receiving the full steps designation. This exacting standard explains why so few coins qualify and why those that do command such significant premiums. For collectors building sets of Jefferson Nickels, the 1963 issues often become the unexpected stoppers, coins that seem common but prove extraordinarily difficult to find in the desired grade. Many collectors who easily acquire key dates like the 1950 D in gem condition find themselves searching for years to find a properly struck 1963 with full steps detail. Now that we've explored these three remarkable Jefferson Nickels from the late 1950s and early 1960s, let's take a moment to reflect on what makes them so fascinating as a collecting theme. These coins perfectly illustrate one of numismatics' most intriguing paradoxes, that some of the most challenging coins to find in top condition are those that were produced in the millions and that most people would never look at twice. These nickels also demonstrate the evolution of collecting preferences over time. 30 years ago, few collectors paid much attention to strike quality on Jefferson Nickels. Today, it's become one of the primary value drivers in the series. This shift in collecting focus has created new, key dates that weren't recognized in earlier generations of numismatic literature. And don't be discouraged by the high prices mentioned for the finest examples. Part of the thrill of numismatics is that undiscovered treasures are still out there. New auction records for these dates are still being set as previously unknown gem examples emerge from old collections and hoards. The next record-setting 1959, 1961, or 1963 nickel might be sitting in an old coin album or mint set somewhere, waiting to be discovered. Whether you're a dedicated Jefferson nickel specialist or simply someone who enjoys the hunt for valuable coins, these three dates offer something special: the possibility that extraordinary value might be hiding in ordinary pocket change. And isn't that possibility, that mixture of history, artistry, and treasure hunting, what makes coin collecting such an endlessly fascinating pursuit? Keep checking those coin jars and those old collections. You never know what might be hiding in plain sight. Until next time, happy collecting.